Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with our journey, our discussions, our discoveries, and our explorations with respect to the recent releases made by the Criterion Collection during this year of 2022. That brings us to that title, which has been released this year by Criterion at spy number 1126. This is a work that is described as being from the year 1944, and the name of the filmmaker is Billy Wilder, and the name of the work is Double Indemnity. This is the work from the year 1944, and it is from the director Billy Wilder. It is based upon the novel or novella by James M. Cain, and it is written for the screen by Billy Wilder and Raymond Chandler. A screenplay by, or in collaboration, these two in collaboration here, Wilder and Chandler. And among its stellar cast, we have these icons of cinema, Fred MacMurray and Barbara Stanwyck and Edward G. Robinson. My goodness, what a combination indeed, coming together to form and to collaborate on and to ultimately be part of this supreme, overwhelmingly great work of art. A great example of the cinema of Billy Wilder, the great example of Hollywood cinema, a great example of the film noir tradition. That is this film, which is Double Indemnity. So much has been said about this film, so much can be said about this film, and indeed one of the great treats about these physical media releases of this film, including this new release by Criterion, is the opportunity through the supplements and commentary track, etc., to be able to get a sense of the type of scholarship and attention and interpretations, etc., that have been made and that have been provided in regards to this wonderful masterwork of a film. Of course, one of the places where we can describe or we can talk about the significance of this film is the plot itself. And one of the wondrous things about it is the plot, a type of labyrinth of a murder mystery, a type of procedural on both sides of the equation, so to speak, the investigation side as well as the committing of the crime side, as it were. So we get many aspects, and there's crisscross, double-cross, betrayal, love, passion, and the like, as well as the heights of morality and the depths of immorality and everything in between to form, as I say, this epic work, this wonderful example of the Hollywood thriller tradition, murder mystery tradition, film noir tradition, to the max, Double Indemnity. So to the plot we go. And indeed, we can focus in on many aspects. For example, we have the insurance salesman side. This is, of course, the legendary character, Walter Neff, in the form of the performance by Fred MacMurray. And we have his attempts through his day-to-day dealings in selling insurance door to door, his meeting and his interaction and his encounter, chance or not chance, depending on one's interpretation perhaps, with one of the other main characters of the work. This is Phyllis Dietrichson, who is, of course, that character portrayed by the one, the only Barbara Stanwyck. And so therein lies this very crucial, critical, and key character interaction, because as we know, this interaction between Walter Neff and Phyllis Dietrichson will form the main, say, heart and soul, as maybe a dark and very sinister soul, as one might describe it, depending on the viewpoint of the plot, because it involves murder or the plotting or planning of murder. And perhaps the subject of that plot or planning could be someone very close to Phyllis. And so we have the various interconnections and interweavings of how to, first of all, come up with this plot. Also, what are the emotional stakes involved in convincing one person or the other in order to go along with this? Because after all, it is not in the form of the everyday that one agrees to engage in a plot of murdering another human being. And so there are these steps in terms of what one character says to the other, what kinds of situations involve the other, what kinds of emotional stakes, traps, the types of feelings of being, say, isolated or alone, or perhaps there are other items of emotional agenda going on as well, other plots that are being hatched and unleashed, maybe to the benefit or maybe to the detriment of the other, and the like. And so we have therefore this connection with the immoral and the greedy and the purely the passions of characters that will make them do things that maybe they wouldn't necessarily do otherwise. Or perhaps therein lies one of the great and quite disturbing aspects of the film noir tradition in the form of a film like Double Indemnity, is that maybe these plots or these machinations or these temptations that appear before one in terms of the perspectives of the characters, perhaps they yield or they lead to characters doing things that they would otherwise not be willing to do in any other ordinary circumstances, due to some kind of moral fiber that they might be said to have inherently within themselves. Or perhaps the opposite might be true. Maybe there is something deep down within us in the representation of these characters that reveals that perhaps this is a dark and immoral and quite evil place indeed. Whatever the case may be, when one is watching, the film Double Indemnity, one is in for one heck of a ride throughout these various settings and locales set in Los Angeles, whether it be the vistas or the outside locations of the houses and exteriors, or maybe it be the cramped claustrophobic interiors of train carriages or cars that may or may not start on time. Maybe it's the notion of being inside offices or office spaces or interior locations like these incredibly immaculately stacked shelves of markets. Or maybe it's the interesting window pane or door frame layout involved in, say, the insurance company. And that is another cross-section of the film that is very important here. Not only do you have certain aspects of plot and planning and indeed murder and crime, or the attempts at trying to commit a crime, and the emotional stakes involved, and the betrayal and double cross involved, and the type of voice-over narration precision that is involved in the plot and the planning of that particular act or acts, as the case may or may not be when one was watching Double Indemnity. The other side of the coin is, of course, the inquiry, the investigation. It might be said to be a type of arrow that is pointing towards the hope or possibility of some kind of moral center in an otherwise amoral or immoral universe that is perhaps the world of Double Indemnity. And here we have the great cross-section of the character of Keyes. This is the Edward G. Robinson character, and his interactions, of course, in the context of claims investigations in the insurance company that Walter Neff is involved in, and also that relationship that is occurring and that is well established between these two men, these two characters, Fred McMurray's character and Edward G. Robinson's character, and the type of suspense that is generated and built as to whether or not the plot will be revealed, the plot will be discovered, whether or not the crime will be given away, or whether they will indeed get away with it. And perhaps even in the hopes of quote-unquote getting away with it, what are ultimately the costs that are at stake, and what are the things that the perpetrators will indeed give up for the sake of trying to get away with it. And indeed, can it be really said that they get away with it, or maybe something else underneath, bubbling up to the surface, is indeed going on? And therein lies more of the surprise, more of the suspense, more of the great engagement and character and feel and atmosphere and overall flavor and life and soul that is that can be said to be, and that is indelibly part of the experience of watching this incredible masterwork of a film, excuse me, this Billy Wilder epic, this great film noir tradition, this great Hollywood murder mystery thriller. Everything is here, which is Double Indemnity. And so here in this, I'm speaking too of many of the aspects of, say, performance and style. So I think we've mentioned, of course, the great trio here of Barbara Stanwyck and Edward G. Robinson and Fred MacMurray. And this is, in many ways, a type of a beautiful, perfect combination, a perfect coming together of these great performers, these great actors who are giving their all in roles and in this work that is for all time eternal. We have, of course, the great, I mentioned it, of course, already, the Edward G. Robinson performance. It's dynamite. It's absolutely dynamite. And little things, too, like just the way that his intuition, he is very much part of his attempts at trying to figure out the plots behind various claims, including the primary crime in question. And so that is something that is, again, pointing to some kind of moral center, but also something that adds a great deal of suspense. Layers and layers and layers of suspense are piled on here because our feelings, our sympathies are drawn in many different directions, even when we have this immoral morass, if you will, of the dark and underbelly of this type of a world where crime can indeed occur. And here we have the great interaction with other characters here. Fred MacMurray here, who it's mentioned in the supplements and the commentary track, and we'll talk a little bit about it later in the second half of this video. But Fred MacMurray's performance here is electrifying because there's so much in terms of the seemingly calm exterior, level-headed exterior that is very much part of this Americana, all-American type of image of the traveling door-to-door salesman selling insurance. I mean, there is something very much, very much of a type of intuitive gravity to that type of image of a character thrust into this world of unknown and crime and high stakes because of, in many ways, his unraveling. Or perhaps, that's another great aspect of the Fred MacMurray performance, is one can question and one can interpret what the source of his motivations might be. Could they be due to passions? Could they be due to some kind of maybe hopes of some of greed and money and a type of sexual gratification? Or maybe there's something inherent in him that makes him do what it is he ends up trying to do or endeavoring to do throughout the film. And so therein lies one of the wonderfully perplexing aspects of various interpretations of this film, namely how one reads the character of Walter Neff in the brilliant embodiment as provided by the brilliant performance of Fred MacMurray. It's one of the great classic performances in Billy Wilder films, in any Hollywood film. Brilliant stuff. And of course it's countered with such great grace and balance and dexterity and charm and emotional and sexual energy and a real screen presence that is utterly sublime and to die for. And I'm speaking, of course, of the performance by Barbara Stanwyck as Phyllis Dietrichson. This is one of the most iconic characters ever. And it is so iconic in terms of the character, how she is introduced into the film. It's very memorable. It's spoken about by so many. It's spoken about in the context of the supplements, etc. It is so iconic and so memorable, and indeed, it shows off that flair, that character, that spark, that clinging to life that Phyllis Dietrichson undeniably has. But I say that on the one hand because while it might be said, that Phyllis Dietrichson is a character that clings to life or seeks or yearns to cling to life, she also, in a very maybe paradoxically and brilliantly and disturbing way, also clings to the concept of death. And so therein also lies that great, as I say, paradox or contradiction, and that wonderfully rendered contradiction among many contradictions in the embodiment of this character. So complex, so rich, so filled with expression and also detail. Even the tiniest hint of a curl of the lip to indicate a smile goes miles. And there is, in particular, there are many moments of that iconic acting grace, as shown by Barbara Stanwyck here as Phyllis. But there's one in particular is a great example of a close-up on her face as she's behind the wheel of a car, a very important scene. And we see that look on her face as something is going on, maybe in the close vicinity of where she is, but the camera's on her face. And this close-up, this way in which she commands the screen, her presence commands the screen, her visage commands the screen in this way that is in many ways one of the key critical moments of the film in terms of plot, in terms of balance, in terms of emotional intensity. This is for the record books. Something that it has to be seen to be believed. It's that type of magical power. And this is the magic of classical Hollywood cinema right here embodied in a close-up like this on this iconic face, this visage, of the performance of Barbara Stanwyck as Phyllis Dietrichson. So here we have performances that are, again, for the record books, brilliant. And of course, they are guided along by the great combination of style and a revelation of plot and detail, the voiceover narration, the dialogue, of course, the setting. We have this great balancing act, or this great adaptation act. We have, of course, the underlying novella source, James M. Cain's source novel or novella, which, as is acknowledged and discussed in some of the supplements, we have some of the passages that are indeed more or less intact on the one hand in terms of dialogues or monologues on screen that are very important, that show a rhythm and cadence of the speech. At the same time, we also understand that this is a screen adaptation, and that screen adaptation had a lot to do with, or primarily to do with, this wonderful collaboration between Billy Wilder and Raymond Chandler. And a lot is, of course, been said about this very complex, professional working relationship between these two gentlemen. And we'll talk about that a little bit when you get to the supplements, because it is mentioned in many parts of the supplements here, this collaboration between Wilder and Chandler, and what it resulted in, of course, because it resulted in this great work that is Double Indemnity. But of course, we have the wonderful way in which certain, say, scenes or changes were made to the underlying source work that turned this film into the phenom that it was and indeed is. And of course, under the guiding hand of the direction of Billy Wilder, commanding all these moments of time to be brought together under one roof, as it were, in the form of this film. It is truly amazing. There is so much to be said, too, about Billy Wilder, and one of the great strengths of this Criterion release is the devotion that the supplements give to the career and life of Billy Wilder. And to take a moment here, too, which is mentioned also in the supplements, too, we have to keep in mind that this film figures in very closely, of course, to the development and the establishment of what one might call film noir in the classical Hollywood tradition, and that is definitely the case. And we have this reflected in the staging, the framing, the photography, the lighting, and the shadows, etc., as well as the way in which the characters are presented in this type of immoral universe. Or in a universe where immoral things can happen at the will or the vice or the greed command of the primary characters that we see at the center of these films, that are heroes or anti-heroes, that are villainous but also have our sympathies in this great, perplexing mix of sympathies that this film engenders as we, the viewers, watch it. So it creates a sense of unease as well as a sense of fascination, a paradox through and through. And and brilliant, brilliant for it. And then also we have, too, the way in which this film fits into the context of Billy Wilder's career, also fits into the context say, the adaptation of various forms forms, or not forms, but various, say, aspects of history, the way in which a story which is said to be rooted in its source material in, say, Depression era history, then finds its translation onto screen in the context of this, say, film which is made during the war years. And also we have the possibility of interpretation of a story like this to be setting forth maybe some kind of maybe emotional malaise, or a type of desperation, an emotional desperation that could be said to be derived from or having its links to, say, earlier U.S. history stemming from the Depression into the 30s, into the war years, and the type of economic constraints, and also the emotional constraints that this type of flow of history might have yielded. And then we have, as a possible result, or one interpretation in the context of a historical artifact, interpretation of this film, Double Indemnity, as well as, of course, the way in which this idea of, say, of a type of a philosophical unease, or a type of dread, or a type of maybe nihilistic approach to humanity also can creep in or seep in. And we have too the type of links and discussion points, again, in the context of Billy Wilder and his career and his life, from his sort of biographical details in Germany to when he came over to the United States. And also there's also mention of the fact of maybe family roots and family links that he had during the war, and that were very significantly affected by what happened in Europe during the war. And so that is also said as being one of the other ways in which one can look at Double Indemnity in terms of the context of a social, political, and historical work that is not just important in the context of Hollywood, classical cinema, and film noir, but also in the context of U.S. history, and indeed geopolitical dynamics having to do with the war, and indeed beyond, because this film has a longevity beyond its initial release year, and that's one of the great strengths of this. So for this and other reasons, we have a film, Double Indemnity, that stands the test of time, that has so many possible interpretations and then some, and is also, too, such an entertaining work. You know, I remember catching up with this film rather young, on VHS tape, and it became one of those films where one could always watch, you know what I mean, if it was on TV, or if one could rent it or get it on, say, a physical media copy later, including now 2022 for Criterion's release here, which is great, by the way. When one puts it on, you have to watch it to the end. It's that captivating, and it goes by so quickly. It's one of those films where one can I can rewatch it so many. I have rewatched it so many times. It's utterly fascinating, utterly fantastic. Everything just fits. It's just right, straight down the line, right? Exactly, straight down the line, and then some. What a film this is, and it's great to have this introduced in this physical media form. In the context of the Criterion Collection. I'm, of course, speaking of this great, great work, which is Double Indemnity. The Criterion Collection has released this film, Double Indemnity, into its physical media catalog during this year of 2022 at spine number 1126. And what we have here is the 4K UHD plus Blu-ray combo edition. And what that means is we have one disc, which is the 4K UHD disc, and we have the film offered in that format. And then we have Blu-ray, or Blu-rays, because we have two Blu-rays. So overall, total, we have 3 discs. Let me show you what I mean when I open up the case here. And we have this. So this is the 4K disc, which is on this side, the inside of the plastic. And then on this other side, we have 2 Blu-rays, Blu-ray disc 1 and then Blu-ray disc 2. On disc 1, we have the film itself, again, offered in the Blu-ray format. And then on disc 2, we have supplements which were also carried carried on or started in terms of the supplements that were also found on disc 1 of the Blu-ray. So we have the 4K disc, and then we have the 2 Blu-rays. So wow, already a lot of physical media goodness going on here, if I do say so myself. Now, with regard to and we'll talk about what we have in terms of the supplements in a moment later on in this discussion. Before we get to that, of course, let's talk about what the presentation is. It is purported to be based on a new 4K digital restoration. Now, I've already taken the liberty of removing the fold-out insert, and I have some more to say about that later on in the discussion. But one of the aspects of the fold-out insert here is what it says about the restoration on one of its pages, and I quote, Double Indemnity is presented in its original aspect ratio of 1.37 to 1. This new 4K digital restoration was created from a 35mm nitrate composite fine grain held by the British Film Institute. And then just continuing on. A 35mm safety duplicate negative created in 1986 from a fine grain that now no longer exists was used to replace frames missing from the BFI's Element. The original Monaural soundtrack was remastered from the nitrate fine grain. On the 4K Ultra HD disc, the feature is presented in Dolby Vision HDR, high dynamic range. On the Blu-ray, it is presented in high definition SDR, standard dynamic range. And so here we have information about the this presentation here. Now, what I have done is I have seen this Criterion release on the 4K disc, and then I took some moments, and I took a little bit of time, and then I put in the Blu-ray disc, so watched it on both versions here. Now, I must say that, once again, I am not in any way holding myself out to be any type of expert when it comes to the various, say, releases or versions or presentations of this work, Double Indemnity. So I unfortunately do not have a good grasp of such detailed matters. I'm not at all an expert when it comes to the presentation versions of Double Indemnity. I can say, for example, that I have here, for example, an earlier release from Eureka Masters of Cinema, that great label, and here we have the Double Indemnity version here, and we can talk about supplements and similarities and differences actually when we get to the commentary track, which I'll get to momentarily. But with that maybe information established, in other words, with the points that are established that I have no any type of expertise when it comes to the presentation quality history of this release of this film, Double Indemnity, I can say that I am very, very taken with what I saw when I put in the 4K disc. I thought it was beautiful, magnificent. The textures were rich to my own eyes. I felt like the shadows were pronounced, and they felt dark where the darkness needed to be there for purposes of enhancing, say, the mood or the sweep or the emotional resonance of that particular scene. Because as we know, darkness and shadow are very important as they're interwoven into the context of the Los Angeles setting and decor, and the idea too of hidden agendas and artifice and things that are deep within the souls and hearts of these characters here, such that we don't know exactly what's going on until we know it, and until perhaps it's too late. And so that has a lot to do with that look and feel and atmosphere on an emotional level, and of course on a visual level, this idea of the film noir aesthetic that is on display, a murder mystery aesthetic of the classical Hollywood tradition on display. And it is there in full glory, I might say, to my eyes and to my ears when I watched the 4K disc here. I thought it was brilliant. I thought it was fantastic. I thought it looked so wonderful. Everything looked so wonderful, you know, straight down the line for both of us, for all of us, right? It really was that type of overwhelming, moving, fantastic, entertaining experience. And I felt I was along for the ride the entire way from start to finish and enjoying every step of it. So the 4K disc looks and feels and sounds fantastic. And then I watched the Blu-ray, and I must say too that the Blu-ray also I felt that sense of rush and entertainment and thrill both seeing it and watching it. So I am very, very happy. I'm very taken with this, and this is going to be a go-to release for me. I think I anticipate that for weeks and months, and indeed years to come. So I'm very, very pleased with this, and I'm very happy with the details. I'm very happy with the feel that I get when I'm watching this and having the feel of it, the film, wash over me, and being allowed to absorb it and to let it soak in and to get that atmosphere, the richness and the darkness and everything in between, all presented in this vivid way in terms of this 4K digital restoration. So I thought it was great. I think it is great. So you're getting, I think, a real top-notch presentation here when you talk about this Criterion release. So now let us turn to the commentary track, which is made available here. And this commentary track can be heard as an audio option when you watch the film on the 4K disc, or when you watch the film on the first Blu-ray disc. So you have the option of pushing the audio button or selecting it on the menu to hear the audio commentary track. This is the audio commentary track, which is made available from 2006. Richard Schickel's commentary track. So Richard Schickel is of course a film historian, critic, expert in Hollywood cinema, classical Hollywood cinema, and cinema writ large, including this work Double Indemnity. And so this is a commentary track already existing, but we have it here again made available for purposes of this release. So it's a great commentary track, and just to maybe go over the points that I think make it so great and make it so worthwhile. So for instance, he does go into this idea of film noir, the concept of the genre or the style or the category that one has come to know as film noir, and the basic elements. And he discusses at the very start why it is that Double Indemnity is often regarded as being one of the most important landmark establishing works in what can be said to be this field of cinema known as film noir. And he goes into, of course, that very critical link between this film and James M. Cain. And James M. Cain having, I think he mentions to his prominent works, The Postman Always Rings Twice, and then, of course, Double Indemnity. And also how there is this idea of a newspaper article style to the writing, and how that might be said also to be very fitting in terms of what ended up becoming the film adaptation. And also part of that too, or maybe in parallel to that, we have the way in which first-person narration is used. And also first-person narration is very important in terms of the conception of how the story is structured for purposes of Double Indemnity. Now, speaking of first-person narration and the characters, we have, of course, then mentioning in the commentary track about Fred McMurray and the importance of Fred McMurray, and the way in which his Walter Neff as a character is a real standout for a number of reasons, both in terms of physical attributes and also in terms of the emotional character arc that Walter Neff goes throughout the course of this film. And not just Walter Neff, of course, we have the iconic character of Phyllis Dietrichson. This is, of course, the Barbara Stanwyck character. And we have this idea of the wonderful entrance at the very start, this iconic entrance of this iconic character. Now, going back to Cain's writing, according to Schickel here in the commentary track, this idea too about how while Cain's writing had this really this sort of almost matter-of-fact style, as Schickel describes it, on the one hand. On the other hand, he does acknowledge how there might have been some work that needed to be applied in order to create a film adaptation of this underlying novel or novella. And that's where Raymond Chandler and Billy Wilder and their collaboration, their very famous or infamous collaboration, comes in. I mean, no matter how one looks at it in terms of its fame or infamy, regardless, one cannot deny the fact that it yielded such a brilliant result that is the film Double Indemnity. And here we have, for example, in the commentary track, things like the colorful metaphors of the great language that's used as part of, say, Walter Ness's inner monologues, etc., and how that could be said to be attributed to maybe aspects of the Wilder-Chandler collaboration specifically, or perhaps, for example, Raymond Chandler, and how, therefore, there can be some connections made to what one understands and appreciates in terms of Chandler's own writings, and how it emerges in the context of the dialogue and the writings and the script of Double Indemnity. But of course, not to take away from that great collaboration that he had with Billy Wilder. And also, at the same time, while these might be said to be moments of difference from the novella of Double Indemnity, at the same time, there are some great parallels in terms of how some of the actual structures or words or writings are actually used and applied in very interesting ways in the actual film adaptation. Speaking of which, one of the interesting overlaps, of course, is another key character, that of Keyes, is the Edward G. Robinson character. And Richard Schickel explains here how maybe in the novella, the character of Keyes might have been a certain way, but that for the film, one can say that his character had been expanded. And indeed, by that expansion, one can say, in terms of regarding of this film or reading of this film, Double Indemnity, one aspect of reading this film is to look at it as a love story. A love story, of course, or a story of love and passion and betrayal, maybe in the context of the relationship between Phyllis and Walter, but also a love story, also love, passion, and betrayal as well, in the context of that great relationship between Walter Neff and Barton Keyes. So we have the great relationship here between Edward G. Robinson's Keyes and then Fred McMurray's Walter Neff. And so that also forms a very key heart and soul kind of anchor to the film that I think guides the film along and provides that maybe moral anchor that serves as a very important and crucial counterpoint to what might be said to be the remaining parts of the film that could be said to be dealing with the immoral and the evil and the ugly in terms of human nature. So this is a very, very important aspect here. And also maybe here in the commentary track, one of Richard Schickel's maybe criticisms of the film, although very slight and minor in the context of his overall love and admiration for the work Double Indemnity, is maybe he recognizes or acknowledges or perhaps brings up the point about how one might say that there might seem to be not as many sort of intensely sexually charged, passionate scenes between Phyllis and Walter as one might have expected in, say, a film noir of this type or of this, say, character trajectory. This is brought up in the commentary track. Now, I'm not sure if I would go that far, because there is a lot to be said in terms of reading the film, not only in the context of the love-passion relationship that could be said to be existing between Walter and Phyllis, but also, and it's, I think, brought up in other parts of the supplements that we'll talk about momentarily, it's this idea, too, about how maybe what goes into, say, what could be said to be the motivation of the characters and the reasons why they end up doing what it is they end up doing. Is it really because of some kind of love or passion or wanting to get into a relationship with someone they've just met? Or maybe there's something else lurking beneath. Maybe there's something that's been always there lurking in their heart of hearts, something that might be speaking to, again, innately immoral, innately quote-unquote evil. And this is just the catalyst. And so in that way, we can therefore use or rely upon this maybe the way the commentary track suggests that maybe there are not as many scenes of highly intense sexual charged energy as maybe other film noir films of the period or a little bit later. We can look at that in one of two ways. I suggest one way is, yes, indeed, that's true. That criticism is indeed valid, but that assuming that it's true, it might go towards looking at the film in a different interpretation or vantage point, namely the idea of the innate immorality of the characters on the one hand, or one can disagree with that criticism and in fact counter that criticism by saying, in fact, we get a lot of highly charged sexual tension and energy in the film and what we see and how it's embodied in a lot of the scenes. I think Richard Schickel also acknowledges this as well, as this being an alternative approach to that type of critique were to come up. So it's not to say that I would say that he strongly and fastly adheres to that type of critique. He's bringing it up as part of another discussion point, which is one of the great points of malleability, I would say, when one regards and listens to this great commentary track. And also he speaks too about the the great contribution of, say, the music. I mean, the theme, Miklos Rocha's theme is very, very important. The music, the flow, it opens with a bang when we watch and listen to the opening credits, and it doesn't, it never lets go. There are moments of high-strung tension and supreme drama to the max, and this is due to a lot of elements, including the critical element of the music. So I'm glad this is mentioned here. Also, too, this is set in Los Angeles, but the great observation about how there are a lot of scenes in the darkness, in the rain, in terms of the weather. So it seems to be almost the antithesis to what one might expect in terms of the quote-unquote typical LA weather that is often depicted in Double Indemnity. Not to say that we don't get those scenes and scenarios of quote-unquote such typical weather, but what I am saying is it does also have its healthy doses of the dour and the wet and the rainy, etc. And this is I think a great comment, a great observation, one of many great observations in the commentary track. And then too, the idea of how to present this amoral or immoral story, because we have main characters, main protagonists, antagonists, anti-heroes that are also very much, and that's one of the great engaging aspects of the film, just how, in a certain degree, how likable these characters who are doing these very dastardly deeds, how likable they are in terms of viewer engagement with the film. I mean, we are attracted to them, we are drawn to them for certain reasons. And I think one of the reasons is the fact that maybe the people around them, those sort of the characters that are either on the periphery or also maybe the targets or subjects of, say, some of the plots that are hatched as part of the film noir detective murder elements of this film, those people, those victims, are oftentimes depicted in a less than flattering light. And so what that does is that further makes our say tendencies as viewers to sympathize with certain characters even more strongly relevant in the direction of, say, our anti-heroes. And so people who are quote-unquote committing bad things in the story of Double Indemnity, we can still go along to a certain degree with what they're doing, because maybe the targets of those crimes are in themselves maybe depicted in less than flattering lights. And I find that a very interesting dynamic point of the film. In other words, it does, in these subtle ways, this is an example of how this film in subtle ways goes towards trying to establish a sense of, say, maybe making excuses for the immoral acts, or otherwise muddying the waters in terms of how we as viewers can associate and sympathize and empathize maybe with a lot of what's going on here, as terrible and as horrible as it actually is when we stop to think about it. There is a type of almost romantic energy that is part of this film in terms of the hypnotic swirl and the way in which it captures us. And I think part of the reason why it does is it makes other aspects of why they are so unsatisfied with the world so unflattering. And so that makes what they feel something that we can maybe cling to, at least from maybe a temporary or a certain maybe degree when we watch the film. And so he then talks here about the idea of the plotting, how this is also very strictly, very fine-tunedly plotted in terms of a murder mystery, and also it's in terms of a mystery thriller on the other side, because not only do we are privy to the actual steps of the plot leading to the crime, we also are privy to the steps of the investigation, the inquiry, the thinking of the Keyes character, what it is he is, the clues that he's catching on to that might lead to the ultimate downfall or not. Who knows? You have to watch the film to find out. But that might or might not lead to the downfall of our anti-heroes. And so I love that setup too. And this is acknowledged as part of the great strengths of the film, according to the commentary track. Great stuff. And also the idea too, stepping back here, about how Double Indemnity can be said to be this quintessential example of the film noir genre, which itself is a quintessential, according to Schickel here, the quintessential American genre. And I think that's very, very apropos, especially when we recall a lot of the stuff that's happening here. Los Angeles, the door-to-door salesman, the crime, the idea of a type of maybe emotional malaise that might be set on because of the after effects of the war period, the war years, etc., and everything that pertains to. That could be very much part of, say, some kind of fabric of Americana as captured in the embodiment of this work, Double Indemnity. So in that way, and as a film noir genre, in that way, I think what's said here in the commentary track is really spot on. And so, therefore, for these and other reasons, this commentary track is really quite wonderful. And so, I'm glad it was Criterion was able to include it. It would have been nice to have, of course, like with any release, more commentary tracks, the merrier. It would have been nice maybe if there could have been a new commentary track. Not to take anything away from the Schickel commentary track. I think it's really great, but there could have been a new commentary that would have been really lovely. In case you're wondering too, there's this I mentioned too, the Eureka Masters of Cinema Double Indemnity release that also has another commentary track, Nick Redman and Lem Dobbs, and so this is also so great. It would have been so cool maybe if Criterion could have included that one as well as maybe an alternate commentary track, etc. Because, as I say, the more the merrier. But in any event, what we are still getting here is really brilliant. So if you haven't heard the this commentary track, the Richard Schickel commentary track, I strongly recommend it. Once again, you can watch the 4K disc with or without the commentary track, or you can watch the film on Blu-ray, disc 1, with or without the commentary track. So that is, the commentary track is included here with this Criterion release. Okay, so continuing on, however, because we don't just have the commentary track, we also have a number of supplements that are included. Once again, let me say that the supplements themselves, other than the commentary track, the supplements themselves will not be found on the 4K disc. They will be found on the Blu-ray disc 1 and disc 2. And so, once again, the fact that we have 2 Blu-ray discs, I think, should be a reminder, a wonderful reminder of just how much stuff we're getting in terms of the supplement menus. Again, the supplements that I'm about to talk about will be found on the Blu-rays. So let's first focus on Blu-ray Disc 1 and what we can find in terms of the supplemental menus and the supplemental sections and selections on such Blu-ray Disc 1. First up is a one-on-one discussion with Noah Eisenberg, and this is called Words, Words, Words. And Noah Eisenberg is described here as editor of Billy Wilder on Assignment Dispatches from Weimar, Berlin, and Interwar Vienna. This is described as being from 2022, approximately 17 minutes. And here we have a wonderful discussion of the biographical points and information regarding the important key figure, who is Billy Wilder. And so he mentions here the idea of Billy Wilder as someone who is from Europe, and having worked, for instance, in Vienna and gone to Berlin, and then due to circumstances involving Germany in the 1930s, goes to the United States, and he ends up becoming naturalized as a U.S. citizen. And then, of course, enjoying this wonderful career, a successful career in the context of Hollywood filmmaking, including Double Indemnity. And so here we have a number of points about the biography of Billy Wilder that come up here in this wonderful one-on-one discussion. And this idea, too, about how Billy Wilder is a writer-director, a filmmaker in the context of U.S. cinema, in primary part in terms of the, say, number of films in his filmography, shall we say, but indeed, and especially in the context of film like Double Indemnity and beyond, but indeed in the context of what Eisenberg here is saying, Noah Eisenberg is saying, he is also, Billy Wilder is also indebted to Europe. That's his phrase, and I think that's really interesting because we do see how this connection and relationship and these biographical details that are linked to Europe during, say, the early part of Billy Wilder's life, how they do emerge in one form or another, or indeed many various forms, when we examine the works of Billy Wilder, including, I might say, Double Indemnity. So it's a fantastic conversation here, talking about the early days, growing up, and his time in terms of his studies, and then his work and time in newspaper, journalism, and how this might have a lot to do with later how Billy Wilder could be said to be regarding with great affection the very quote unquote sort of standard characters that might often be seen in classical Hollywood cinema, the newspaper reporter, the private eye, the door-to-door salesman, and that sort of thing. And so that has its mold in a great example in terms of the newspaper reporter. So this idea of Americana as so exemplified. And then talking about his writing work, his screenplay work, for instance, People on Sunday, etc., and then honing his craft as a storyteller, and then the idea too of going to the U.S. and then honing his skills in terms of his language skills of the English language. This is very, according to Eisenberg, this is something that's very important in from the perspective of Billy Wilder, etc. And then leading to his turn in terms of director, becoming a director, mentioning the major and the minor, for instance, and then turning our attention to what is described here, I think so wonderfully so, as the quintessentially American Double Indemnity. And it's quintessentially American on the one hand, but it has, again here, I love this, quote unquote, European sensibility on the other hand. And this is very interesting too, again, linking back to the biography of Billy Wilder, remembering too, or reminding us that this film is being made during the war years, World War II. This idea of what is described here as quote unquote a European sensibility, I think is described as on the one hand, the way in which existential dread is expressed in the context of the characters of Double Indemnity, which is also, again, it's asserted here or argued, which is also such dread is fueled by a lack of knowledge on the part of Billy Wilder about what is happening to, say, his family and relatives and close loved ones who are still in Europe during the war. And maybe this is linked to, again, this is maybe a hypothetical statement, but I think it's it's a not unreasonable one to make, this idea. Maybe there's also something on a psychological basis to link to this idea of Billy Wilder regarding himself as a survivor, having been able to escape the turmoil that is Europe during the war years. And then maybe there's this idea of guilt because of that having survived. And so this idea of the lack of understanding, the lack of knowledge, the lack of information about what's happening to his loved ones, his family and relatives who are still in Europe during the war, while he is in the U.S. making films like Double Indemnity. And so this idea of the existential dread is very much part of this. And that too, I think by extension, fuels what one might call the film noir sensibilities of this film, because the idea of the unknown, the idea of the betrayal, the idea of existing in a space, but then not really having one's bearings in what the space is, and be feeling a sense of lack of balance. And it's because of this lack of balance that we get a whole shift of suspense and turmoil and mayhem that is arising because of the plot dynamics of this film, Double Indemnity. Well, that has all to do with the sense of dread, the sense of unknown, the sense of guilt. And I think that is a really powerful assessment and a possible way of interpreting this film, one of many ways indeed. And this idea, too, of Billy Wilder as an artist, as a filmmaker, how he had this approach towards this idea of a belief in the sanctity of the words, a writer's director, or a director's writer, one of those things, but perhaps a writer's director, because it is described here about how he placed so much emphasis on the sanctity of the words, preserving the words on the page, not letting the words be changed. And so this idea of words, and more words, and this idea too of a crossword puzzle setting history as part of one of his biographical details, etc. This too reminds us of the great importance that we have when we are listening to the rhythms of the speech, when we are absorbing the words that are spoken, both out loud or in terms of inner monologues, etc. And we also understand that words do have a function in the world of Billy Wilder, including, of course, in the world of Double Indemnity. So, for these and other reasons, this discussion is wonderful. So please check it out if you can. Once again, this is the 17-minute discussion with Noah Eisenberg. Words, words, and words. That's not all, because the next up on Disc 1 supplement, we have Imogen Sarah Smith and Eddie Muller on Double Indemnity. And the two of them here are speaking in this conversation with each other, described as being from 2022, approximately 30-31 minutes. And this conversation is so great. They are such experts in this field, in Billy Wilder's career and filmography, Double Indemnity, Hollywood cinema, classical, everything. They are such experts. And to have this collaboration discussion is sublime. Utterly, utterly sublime. So here the two of them are speaking about how one might regard Double Indemnity as a kind of quote-unquote definitive film noir, how it was it was a success. It was also a film that is regarded as a World War II film. And there's also this idea of the depiction of it's a dark film. It's a pretty disturbing dark film. And I love this phrase. It's suggestive, therefore, of a rottenness in middle-class U.S. life. Oh, yes, yes. And how that links into this idea of the depiction of the fabric of Americana, and how, therefore, we have this idea of film noir in the embodiment of films like Double Indemnity being both this type of celebration of this life and lifestyle and culture, but also a type of almost indictment in terms of a recognition of, again, to borrow the phrase, the rottenness of the rot, the moral rot or decay. And that's brought about maybe by external factors, but also perhaps, intriguingly, maybe, possibly, perhaps, brought about due to internal factors as well. Catalysts bring on catalysts. So great stuff. Also mentioning again to the link with James M. Cain, the novella Double Indemnity, how it was a Depression era novel, and also how Cain himself had certain sources. Judd Gray, Ruth Snyder comes to mind. Also, there's an anecdote about a typesetter, which is brought up here in terms of the sources, or what one might refer to as the sources that ended up becoming the stories of James M. Cain, including Double Indemnity. And then talking too, again, speaking about the immorality and the rot that is setting in as being one of the potential readings of the film. Then attention in this great conversation is given to Walter Neff, the character. Maybe, is it about the money, or is it about the crime? Is it about getting together with someone, or is it ultimately about trying to commit something for the sake or the thrill or the excitement, however dastardly and terrible the outcome might be? And so this is also a great possible interpretation, therefore, of the character of Walter Neff, but also a way in which we can read the, say, sexual elements and also the elements of moral decay when we read into Double Indemnity. Is it an externally imposed one, or is it an internally based one? And I think the possibilities either way, I think, yield very, very very complex results. So that's great. Also, more comparisons between the book and the film. Again, like with the commentary track, mention here is made about the expansion of the Keyes character and the love story element between Keyes and Neff being one way maybe that one can see a distinction between the book and how certain aspects were then adapted or readapted or expanded. Also, one might say that Phyllis seems to be a somewhat different or quote-unquote larger character, a more prominent character in the film than in the book. One might say through the brilliance of the Barbara Stanwyck performance, she's not just a quote-unquote monster, but she also has a certain dynamic of, say, maybe I'm not sure if understandability is the right word, but there is a degree to which one doesn't necessarily regard her as being maybe a thoughtless, cold monster. There is potential for reading her character in terms of the motives behind what it is that she tries to do, or she ends up doing. So I think this is great. A match made in hell. What we have here, that's a great discussion here. And then, too, the importance of the emergence of Fred MacMurray as a type of all-American salesperson on the one hand, but how this image seems to be warped or subverted in a way that is to the film's benefit so well. He also talking too about how maybe there are certain difficulties that the actor might have had on set with regard to these long speeches, but it didn't matter because the end result was that such an iconic performance as a kind of heel, according to Imogen Sarah Smith. I love that. And then too, speaking about the Edith Head fashion design, brilliant, iconic. Also, there's a shot too of Barbara Stanwyck's face in a car. A very important scene, and that is also regarded here with, this is one of the great moments, another example as to why this film is so great. And the idea too of the set design, there's this homogeneous industrial design, processed artificial look, and they use the market as an example here. I think that's really interesting. And again, it maybe gives way to this idea of maybe a foreshadowing as to the hint of consumerism that will be on the way once the 40s enters into the 50s. But here we have maybe as part of that too, this idea of an artificial take or look. And maybe that has to do with the world of Los Angeles. That also might have to do with the way in which the characters are interacting with each other. Are they real, or is there something artificial going on here? And that also too might go into explaining this look of the hair of the character Phyllis, which I think is a really interesting reading too, about how there's also this artificial look to it, which maybe some might have over the years regarded as one of the criticisms of the film, but maybe as one thinks about it and regards it, one can see even the way in which Phyllis's hair appears. Maybe there is a sense of having a type of artificial feeling about even that look, which is, I think, going hand in hand with the sense of the artificial, the artifice. And great reading there. Also, this idea of L.A. and Chandler, and the collaboration between Chandler and Wilder, again, very famous or very infamous. And also, a mention here is made of the director of photography, again, Seitz, John F. Seitz, and how he is described here as, in many ways, a type of experimental take in a lot of ways, and he uses or relies on low lighting, but still that serves the film so effectively because, again, it's about light and also shadow and darkness. Very much so, and there's so many scenes that are shot in darkness. Again, in the 4K presentation, for example, you see it so beautifully. And so this is, again, I'm glad that John F. Seitz is mentioned here. It's a story about villains. It's a story about love, betrayal, and everything in between. What a great conversation here. Please check it out if you can. Again, approximately 31 minutes. And that's not all, because then we get a 2006 kind of documentary, which is Shadows of Surprise. This is approximately 37 minutes. We also get Eddie Muller again. We also get other speakers who are talking about, once again, double indemnity. That's the topic. That's the hot topic. And my goodness, what a great hot topic it is. It's so wonderful to hear it here. Again, here I'll talk about the hard-boiled fiction roots, traditions here. We have maybe that the book itself, and it's very focus on, say, the risque, immoral characters, how maybe it was regarded as something that could not be filmed. The Double Indemnity being a story that was not filmable, unfilmable, but it was the unfilmable film. That was the challenge of Billy Wilder and Raymond Chandler. And here we have the collaboration mentioned. Chandler and Wilder, it's described as being approximately 4-month collaboration in terms of the writing and also the application of narration. Barbara Stanwyck, her iconic status when she entered into this film, and also Fred McMurray here, also Edward G. Robinson is mentioned. Style and shadow is mentioned. Again, I mentioned before, but we'll say it again, the appearance of Phyllis for the first time in this film. So memorable indeed. And also the idea of the hairstyle, how maybe some might have regarded as being somewhat maybe over the top or comic, but in fact, it does, in one reading, or I think a lot of very favorable readings of the film, it does serve a consistent aspect in terms of the feeding into, say, the world of the artifice, the fake. What we are seeing is maybe not indeed what is the truth, perhaps, maybe. And can we read something into that when we consider Phyllis's character? Maybe, perhaps we can. So, and this idea, continuing on, of the scenes of immorality, the immoral or the amoral, and Chandler in Hollywood, and the reaction to the film, etc., and very key scenes, the crime scenes, etc., etc. It's all here. If you haven't checked out this this great documentary, please do. It's so worthwhile. And then continuing on disc 1 Blu-ray, we have radio plays. We have two of them. First is Screen Guild Theater from 1945, and then Lux Radio Theater from 1950. Screen Guild Theater radio production is 29 minutes. Lux Radio Theater is 56 minutes, both featuring Fred MacMurray and Barbara Stanwyck. So great, wonderful. Wonderful inclusions here. I'm so glad these are included. It's so fun to hear these radio plays, and it's so exciting, so thrilling. When you play it, you get a little shot, a still shot, and you just play it. You hear the audio played over that. So if that works for you, that's fine. You can leave it on, watch it on the TV, or watch it how you watch the disc. It's great stuff, so please check it out. Please check these out. And then we have rounding out the Blu-ray Disc 1 supplemental features. We have the trailer, and my goodness, what a great trailer it is. But that's not all, because not only do we have one Blu-ray disc, we have a second Blu-ray disc. On the second Blu-ray disc, we have, my goodness, what a treat we have in store for us. This is the January 1992 BBC Arena episodes, 3 of them in total, each approximately 1 hour. So we're getting approximately 3 hours worth of wonderful, wonderful goodness stuff. This is Volker Schlundorf and Gisela Grischel, their work, and Schlundorf speaking to Billy Wilder, essentially discussions, interviews, and talks about and with Billy Wilder. Billy, how did you do it? Divided into these 3 episodes here. What a wonderful set of episodes. Episode 1 is approximately 59 minutes. And here we have, for example, Wilder himself speaking about Lubitsch, Ernst Lubitsch, the Lubitsch touch. How did Lubitsch do it versus how does Wilder do it? So it's idea of Lubitsch being this great inspiration and mentor to Billy Wilder, and now Billy Wilder being a great inspiration mentor to the next generation of filmmakers. Now speaking about the Lubitsch touch, Ninotchka, etc. And then having this be a great transition to Billy Wilder's own life and his moving to Hollywood and talking about his collaboration with people like Charles Brackett, also talking about his turn as a director, the major and the minor, and then turning our attention in this episode 1 to Double Indemnity. So if you're looking for something relevant to Double Indemnity, check out episode 1 of the Arena episodes found on the second Blu-ray disc, because it is fantastic. Here we have great points about the film. Double Indemnity is spoken about, the apartment scene, the car scene, the doors, and there's also spoken here too, which is mentioned in the other supplements on the first Blu-ray disc too. This idea of alternate endings or planned endings that were planned, but maybe for one reason or another, one can speculate on, ended up not being what became the final ending of this film, Double Indemnity. So that's also spoken about here. And also here we have maybe some reasons or some discussions as to why Wilder didn't work with Charles Brackett in terms of his collaboration, and how that turned into the great, as I say, famous or infamous famous and infamous perhaps, collaboration between Wilder and Raymond Chandler. And this idea too about how maybe for Wilder, in terms of his writing and how he uses the writing and how it links to his own filmmaking style, directorial style, this idea of classical silent film descriptions that don't go too, quote unquote, overly technical, but they are very standard and very, I think, basic and simple. But the simplicity is what makes, for Wilder, that is the sort of backbone or the heart of the beating heart of his filmography style. So wonderful discussion here. Also the idea of close-ups, this is very important too. Then continuing on with episode 1, we have another important film in Wilder's career. This is The Lost Weekend. There's an interesting point here about it could have been called The Last Weekend, but for a typewriter error. And then this idea of showing the city, showing the backdrop, the environment, as being one of the key points of The Lost Weekend. And this also brings up the discussion about improvisation and what Billy Wilder thinks or regards of improvisation. He ultimately says, in order to be able to improvise well, you must rehearse a lot. And that is, I think, his way of saying rehearsal is very, very important as part of his filmmaking process. and then talking too about the Academy Awards, the attention that the film got, and then speaking too about his other works, his documentary work, Death Mills, and how that is a very close examination, a very harrowing one about World War II and the Holocaust. And then we have also a discussion of A Foreign Affair, and Marlene Dietrich discussed here as well. Then we have other points in episode 1, but that's just one episode. Again, approximately 1 hour, 59 minutes. We go to episode 2, which is approximately 1 hour and 1 minute. And we have other films talked about Emperor Waltz, Sunset Boulevard. When we get to Ace in a Hole, for example, when we get to Sunset Boulevard discussions, there's discussions about William Holden, discussions about working with Gloria Swanson, discussions too about what might have been planned in terms of different openings versus what ended up becoming the opening for that brilliant film, Sunset Boulevard, and also working with William Holden in other films, Stalag 17, and mentioning here plein pouvoir. I love that phrase, and also Billy Wilder and his career leaving Paramount at one point, and then turning the discussion attention to working with William Holden again, and also Audrey Hepburn and Humphrey Bogart in the film Sabrina. And then also there's a discussion about working with these icons and the working habits and the like. And there's also this furtherance of this maybe relationship, working relationship between Holden and Billy Wilder, and then leading to another discussion of other works, Love in the Afternoon, etc. So what a great episode this is, episode 2. But that's not all, because then we go to episode 3, another hour. So this time episode 3, 1 hour and 2 minutes. We have other films discussed here, 7-Year Itch, Some Like It Hot, The Apartment, and Witness for the Prosecution, and others. Speaking of Witness for the Prosecution, I should say personally, I love this film, Witness for the Prosecution. It's one of my favorites growing up. I'm a big fan of the works of Agatha Christie, and so this is, of course, one of the great Agatha Christie adaptations. Alexander Trauner is also mentioned here too. Wonderful set design, certain differences between the play or the underlying work and the film adaptation here, and the like. Just a quick note: if you haven't seen Witness for the Prosecution, maybe I would suggest not watching it. Like with this seems to be an overview of the Billy Wilder's films, and so you get also the ending of what happens, including the ending of Witness for the Prosecution. So if you haven't seen Witness for the Prosecution, maybe watch Witness for the Prosecution. Watch some of the other Wilder works before watching these episodes of Arena. But once you have seen the Wilder works, this is so great, so great. Again, talking about working with Marilyn Monroe in films like The 7-Year Itch, and there is maybe a kind of complex dynamic that Wilder explains in his dealings with and working on the set and professionally with Marilyn Monroe. How he describes it as she having a type of unpredictability about her, which may have been to her detriment, he posits. And so, but it also undeniably was part of her charm and part of her character. And I think a lot of that is captured in those great performances. And Wilder acknowledges, a great actor, a great performer. And so talking about some of the famous iconic scenes in those films. Some Like It Hot too, that great discussion, working with Marilyn Monroe, working with Tony Curtis, working with Jack Lemmon. And of course that Jack Lemmon relationship continues on in another iconic film, The Apartment. He describes working with Shirley MacLaine. He uses the word divertissement, which I think is very interesting. Also, I.A.L. Diamond is mentioned too. So this is also a very important collaboration at work here. So overall, these 3 episodes of Arena, each about an hour, totaling 3 hours. You're getting the life and times and works and overview of Billy Wilder in this. So what great stuff. Again, there are some details about these films, and so my suggestion is, where possible, please watch as many of the works of Billy Wilder as you can for purposes of this, because there are some specific plot points that are discussed in a number of these Arena episodes. But if you don't mind that, or if you have already seen these films, then go ahead. If you haven't watched these Arena episodes, please do so. They are exciting and wonderful and brilliant. And then let me now go to the insert and also the packaging. I've mentioned it before. This version I have here is the plastic case. And so you have on one side, one compartment for the single 4K UHD disc. And then on the other side, double compartment for the Double Indemnity Blu-rays, 2 of them in total. So we have this plastic casing, and again, it's layered, but the surfaces don't touch each other for the Blu-ray double discs, so not to worry about that. And then we have also, excuse me, I forgot to show, the insert, excuse me, the insert would go like this, so it would be on the 4K side to be part of, hooked into these flaps here. And I must say just one thing, I'm okay with the plastic casing, although it would have been really cool. I must admit, it would have been really cool if this had been a digipack presentation, but that's okay. That's okay. And I must say too that the artwork and the look and feel and design of this, in terms of the cover art design, is brilliant. It's great. Art director Sarah Habibi, Eric Skillman. Illustration Greg Ruth, designer Eric Skillman. Wow, look at that look. Look at that. The light and shadow and darkness, it's all there. Walter Neff, Phyllis Dietrichson, it's all there. The smoke, the haze, wow, great. The font, great. And that is carried over into this leaflet, or this fold out. Again, it's the fold out type. I would have loved to have seen a staple booklet. Again, I must say that the Eureka Masters of Cinema release is so wonderful, many reasons, one of which being its robust booklet, which is right here. But be that as it may, for the Criterion release, what we are getting in terms of the essay is a brilliant one. This is The Black Heart of Double Indemnity by Angelica Jade Bastién. And wow, what a wonderful essay this is. Once again, like with all the other essays from Criterion, and maybe with other releases, my strong suggestion is to watch the film first, and then after you've seen the film, you can enjoy and just have fun with this great essay. So well written, talks about all the points of the film, the themes, Billy Wilder, the importance of this film, the history, the dynamics, the characters. It's great, great stuff. So The Black Heart of Double Indemnity, the essay that's included as part of the Criterion release. Please check it out if you can. So that is, in a nutshell, as they say, the Criterion release, as far as how I engaged with it and explored it upon its release here in 2022. This film, Double Indemnity. Wow, wow, wow. There are a number of things that one can say about what we have here in terms of the supplements and commentary tracks, etc. And then ultimately it comes down to the film. It comes down to the film. We have these presentation options in terms of the format. Here I have the 4K UHD plus Blu-ray combo. And then at the end of the day, it is about the film. And my goodness, what a film this is. One of the greats of the ages. One of the great icons of film noir cinema, American cinema, Hollywood cinema, cinema itself. We have this film now released by Criterion this year, 2022. What a release this is. This is the film Double Indemnity. Okay, my dear friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well. And please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. Thank you so much, as always, for your time. I very, very much appreciate it. Stay strong, stay safe, and cheers. Straight down the line for both of us.